Our next speaker is Dr. Per Olsson from the Stockholm Resilience Center. And he did his thesis on national resource management and have been part of the Stockholm Resilience team, research team, since 2004, I think. Since 2007, I'm sorry. Since 2007. Please welcome Mr. Per Olsson, who will talk about socio-ecological innovation.
Thank you, Ruth. You actually took my telephone.
Oh, is that yours?
I need that for time. And thank you very much for having me here. I want to thank IAP and Sida for inviting me and to be part of this discussion on a very important subject. So let me see if I can get the. I think I can do it. Like that. Now you get to see my presentation in rewind. So I'm going to talk about social ecological innovation. I'm going to talk mainly about two things. I'm going to talk about the big picture and the big challenges we have ahead of us. And then I'm going to go more specifically into innovation issues. To start with the first part, the Anthropocene and the global challenges. How many people here have actually heard the word Anthropocene before? Yeah, not all of you, a couple of you. So this is the homepage of IGBP, International Geosphere and Biosphere Program, that on their homepage welcome us to the Anthropocene. And this is a new geological era that some scientists have defined, a new era that follows on the Holocene, which is the era that we have as humans been in for the last 10,000 years. But they say now that it's a different time now when humans are actually dominating a lot of the processes, the geological and biological process on the planet. And that we need a new name for this uncharted, maybe more uncertain times. So the Anthropocene means that also that we affect a lot of the processes in the Earth system. And my colleagues at the center, with Johan Rockström leading it, have talked about planetary boundaries. And I want to also ask you, how many people have heard that before? Planetary boundaries? More people have heard about planetary boundaries than Anthropocene. So the planetary boundary is a way of illustrate this impact that we have on a global scale. And my colleagues then identify 9 of these boundaries and talk about if we transgress these boundaries, we as human beings will end up in a very dangerous place. And they also talk about that we have a safe operating space, so that we need to keep ourselves within. And as you can see on this picture, the black circle in the middle is the safe operating space. And as you can see, there are a couple of these planetary boundaries that have been transgressed already. And one is the rate of biodiversity loss, nitrogen cycle, and also the climate change. So the issue and the challenge that we have is to push these boundaries back and also keep the other one within the safe operating space. But in order to do that, so there is a recognition that we need major transformation in order to reverse the current trends of expanding this safe operating space and past these boundaries. So of course, we can't just do this transformation without paying attention to social issues. So Hugo's colleagues at Oxfam have talked about this, that in this safe operating space, there is also, you need a social floor, and you have these social or social foundation and these social issues that you have to pay attention to when we do this transformation. And that's this environmental ceiling and the social foundation that provides or constitute this space. And of course, innovation is a very important part of these transformations. For making these transformations, that's social, that means social and technological innovations. And in history, because we can say, yes, of course we need innovation, but we also need to reflect on the history of innovation in relation to human well-being and the environment. So this is again from IGBP's homepage, and this shows what we call the hockey stick graphs. And it's, I know you can't read the details of this, but this shows a number of factors where there has been a rapid increase and acceleration, especially from the 50s until now, for various things like total real GDP, population. So the population, human population, has doubled in this time period. Economic activity has exploded. We have people more connected than they have ever been before. So at the same time, there's a lot of things that shows human progress here, and that we actually have gotten a improved life on this planet. There is also these other graphs here that's showing a similar exponential growth in environmental degradation. So the big challenge now for the future is, how do we innovate in a way that improve human well-being and at the same time take care of nature, right? So that's the big challenge. We can't do one and ignore the other. So the question is, how can we feed 7 billion people? How can we feed 9 billion people in the future and stay within the safe operating space? And this is a paper we wrote this year, together with some friends at STEP Center in the UK, about just talk about this operating space and alternative directions for innovation, and what happens if we continue with business as usual. And that there is a need to think about and really think through and about how we innovate and how that affects both social and ecological factors. So let me get into more in detail about the innovations now. Innovations for people and the planet. This is Frederick. He wants to rear and farm cod in his barn, where there used to be cows. This is in southern Sweden. He says that fish farming on land is the future. He might be right, and he's certainly not alone in thinking that. And there are a lot of countries around the world that are investing huge amount of money into fish farming. This is a clip from Jakarta Post, for example, where Indonesia has said that we're going to be the biggest fish producers in 2015. We're going to increase our fish production with 300% over a very short time period. And this doesn't mean go out fishing more. This is aquaculture. This is a picture showing that they have this idea that to increase fish population, they're going to establish what they call minipolitans. These are the fish-producing cities and this is planned for a lot of places in Indonesia, and it has already started. But this is also, this fish farming on land is part of a bigger movement around the world, sometimes called the Blue Revolution, or farming the sea, which is a global effort to increase food production. And this in itself, a lot of people will react to and say this is going to be a catastrophe. But it can also be an opportunity actually to do things right. So although a lot of people have raised concerns about this, there's World Fish, for example, that we work with a bit, who try to look at this aquaculture and the expansion in relation to fisheries, poverty, and food security. There are others also that think about these negative effects that can come with farming the sea at such a large scale. But there's a great challenge there. So how do we do this? How can we use the potential that is there and innovate in a way that we stay within the safe operating space? For example, there is this Veta La Palma, which is in Spain, a fish farm where they experiment with integrated fish farms that provides a number of what we would call ecosystem services. It raises the issue about extensive versus intensive fish farming. And it raises the questions, can we have this one as an extensive fish farm when land is not, when land is in many places a limiting factor? But you also, so there raises the issues of, yes, it might be extensive, but you might get a bundle of ecosystem services produced here instead of just maybe one or two. So the other issue here is these innovations, fish farms, and maybe integrated fish farms. What happens when you do it on a larger scale, so on a national scale or regional scale? What actually happens? What are the social and ecological consequences of this upscaling? That's also something that needs to be considered in relation to these boundaries. Because you might have like biofuels, for example. Biofuels might be a great idea for reducing the climate change effects. But it also, as we see around the globe, lead to social and ecological disaster with land grabbing or biodiversity loss, or if we monoculture, effects like disease outbreaks, etc., or pest outbreaks. And this also raises a question in relation to planetary boundaries. We have to treat these planetary boundaries as they are interacting, because if we deal with one planetary boundary, like the climate change, and use biofuels to deal with that and get that down, you might push the biodiversity planetary boundary up. So we have to deal with these planetary boundaries in an integrated way, because they're all connected. So the question then is, how do we measure progress and impact? And Hugo was addressing this in his talk about better analysis, etc. So how do we measure progress and impact from a planetary boundaries point of view? I'm going to tell you another story about this guy. This guy is a parrotfish. And I'm going to tell you this story because a lot of times we're measuring the wrong things that actually doesn't help us to be prepared for change and uncertainty. So this is a parrotfish living on the coral reef. This fish has a very important job to do in relation to, for example, storms or other disturbances and crises that you have on a coral reef. Coral bleaching, for example, which is very common now and becoming more common with climate change. And what this fish do, it's a herbivore, it's a grazing, it grazes algae. So it's like the cow of the reef. So it's eating algae, but if you have a coral bleaching, for example, means that the corals die. They die. But they can come back. They can start to grow again and expand. But if this guy is not there, the algae will actually come in and colonize. So that means that the coral can't settle again. The coral larvae can't settle again. So you actually get a switch. You can get these rapid shifts or flips from a coral reef to an algae community. And this might, nature doesn't care, but for us as human beings, the coral reef is providing more ecosystem services than an algae-dominated system. So this guy, this parrotfish, is very important. The good thing is that, of course, these population of fish goes up and down and naturally, but lucky for us, there are like a number of these species that provide the same service, the same function, that are also grazers. So there are these species together that provide the response diversity to these kind of crises that we have. So the parrotfish and his friends are indicators of a system's resilience, of a coral reef system resilience, if it's resilience or not. And we need to know that these guys are there in order to know if the reef is healthy. That's a good indicator. What we usually measure for ecosystem health when it comes to coral reefs is how much coral reefs there are. So we measure how big areas, and that is often measured as an indicator of healthy reefs. But the thing is, if you measure that and use that indicator as ecosystem health, then you might end up in a situation where you suddenly have a lot of coral reefs, but suddenly you can lose everything. And the reason for that is that when you start to lose a couple of reefs in a seascape, because they're all connected, you can reach a critical mass of reefs that when you reach that and you lose enough of that connectivity, you have a rapid shift for all the other reefs. So you actually have a threshold. So knowing about these thresholds is also important. And knowing about these early warning systems, the Dowdy you talked about, really early warning systems, it's so important to be able to monitor this and know about it. We don't know much about these thresholds today in ecosystems or social systems, but we're getting there. So you can have these large catastrophic shifts on a very large level if you don't know about these kind of thresholds. And this is a paper that describes such a large-scale change in the Caribbean coral reefs. I'm going to drink some water, and I'm going to try not to dip the microphone. So, Another thing that we need to know about when we talk about an evaluation, we talk about impact and measuring progress. We need to know not only locally, for example, how a fish farm is doing when it comes to social and ecological impact. We also have to take a step back and look at the global scale, what kind of impact it has, and that fish farming in Thailand, etc., is of course dependent on a lot of sources from the outside, especially when it comes to fish food. And this is something that is missed a lot in the impact assessment, etc., is to understand these global dynamics and kind of inconvenient feedbacks, if you want. And when it comes to fish farming also, it's important to see where the fish meal comes from, how it's fished, what kind of impact it has in that place. Also, it's not always that fish feed comes from fish meal. It can also come from chicken, and we know that these large-scale chicken farms, what kind of impact they have. So you have to sort of look at the broader global scale when you evaluate the impact of these very local fish farms. So what we're working with is to sort of develop a framework that pays attention to both social ecological aspects, is this notion of social ecological innovation. And this is a way to so you can take your innovation and put it in the middle and start to evaluating from this perspective of planetary boundaries. What kind of boundaries does it address? What kind of issues, ecological sort of effects can it have? But also to add the social action aspects. And I think that's where Hugo talked about these not just that you evaluate social aspects or ecological aspects, but the interacting aspects, to get at these social ecological interactions and get that into your evaluation systems. I think so. This is meant to help you make such evaluation, but it's not just evaluating individual innovations and the scaling up of those innovations, because one innovation won't do it, and we all know that. There's not one innovation that will help people out of poverty traps. It's a system of innovations, and you need to not only evaluate one innovation, you have to evaluate the system of innovation that you need. And this is just a picture from the Baltic Sea, and there are these efforts around the Baltic Sea to help this very degraded ecosystem back on track. But in order to do so, it's not just oxygenation of the sea bottom or fishing, deliberately fishing within the sort of trophic level of the food web, or farming mussels to get the nitrogen out, or social innovations in form of new governance systems. It's it's all of those that is needed to get, and many more to get the system on track. So you need to be able to evaluate those systems. I think, yes, this is, I'm at the end here of my presentation. These are two recent articles that we produced on this issue, if you're interested, and my address and link to our center is here. And now you have some questions.
Yes, I have some questions. Yeah, when we had a conversation, Per and I had a conversation about the conference and today's agenda and so forth. I understood it that you and your colleagues, you are on a database. You have a very exciting job. You're trying to detect those social changes that will have an ecological effect. Are you looking at both positive and negative changes, or what's your main focus? How do you go about it?
Yes, we have traditionally been very good at ecological aspects. We're moving into more social, addressing the social aspects with the help from Oxfam, etc. That are good at these. So we look at both how ecological and social aspect can take a system on an unsustainable trajectory. But also what we're more interested in is to look at, or at least I am interested, this is my field of research, is to look at actually looking at places where they have made a positive difference. So, and analyze what they've been doing, and looking at how social processes of change, where innovation is part, has changed the human-environment interaction. So in southern Sweden, we have a case study. We have a Great Barrier Reef. The Coral Triangle is another big area that we're working in right now. Just to sort of link, and what we want to do is to link these social social factors of change with the ecological improvement in ecological outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, you say we have to look at those interactions between social impact as well as ecological impact. And it sounds rather complex, so we're grateful to have the researchers, of course, to help us do this. But is there anything you can say to those that are entrepreneurs, that are innovators in terms of their approach to this? You have one paper, there's social innovation, or what are the practical tools out here of your publication or other that you can recommend for entrepreneurs to have in mind or to use?
Well, practical application. I think right now we're experimenting together with the entrepreneurs to come up with these kind of indicators, etc., that make sense to them and to the communities that we're working in. So I think instead of being an expert and just telling people what they should look at, we are engaging in these change networks where we can together learn and experiment together.
So you welcome a lot of questions to your email inbox on this.
Yeah,
that's
definitely
great. And I noticed one link to the previous speaker from Oxfam as well. The CEO of Oxfam has created this adaptation of the planetary boundaries. I don't know if anyone of you have seen it, but I can really recommend it. It's the form of a donut shape, where she has also put the sociological impact within these planetary boundaries, and it's an interesting application and very illustrative of that mix of sociological and social and ecological change. Is there any questions in the audience? Presentation. Yes. Jack Newnham.
Thanks very much, Jack Newnham from the IAP team. Really interesting presentation, and particularly interesting considering how we move forward with the Innovations Against Poverty programme, because we have a kind of implicit environmental remit, but maybe not as explicit as some of our remits around sort of supporting projects which are good for development and have a strong commercial return. So I was flicking through our portfolio booklet as I was listening to your interesting presentation, trying to find, do we have an aquaculture project? No, but we have a edible insect breeding project in Kenya, which, feels like, it kind of fits the bill a little bit, how do you get protein going forward?
Yeah.
And crickets in Kenya, they're in various parts of East Africa, they're kind of caught by lights, but this is trying to commercialise it. And I was wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the sort of mega trends that we should be looking towards in the future? I mean, you mentioned aquaculture, which is very powerful.
Yeah.
We've heard a little bit at times about grubs as a form of protein, and producing grubs as opposed to insects on a commercial basis, and then mashing them up into stuff that can go into food, a bit like soya or something. I mean, what kind of things should we be looking for going forward in IAP that may be a part of the next big thing in terms of marrying environmental sustainability with pro-poor growth?
It's a big question. But yeah, aquaculture is of course one, and I talked about that already. But I think I think the other ones are the more traditional one, like agriculture. There's so much to do there. There's so much we can do still, and especially being part of this green revolution in Africa, for example, with this mindset. I think there's a need for a mind shift there, to this view that we can't just sort of focus on social well-being only, because that's in a lot of cases that's the prevalent, that's the dominating paradigm, and then they say we help people first and then we take care of nature later. We have to help people first, and that's not very helpful in the long run. So I think instead of saying like a specific like aquaculture, etc., I think that's in all sort of processes when it comes to food production, etc. We need that mind shift. I think that mind shift needs to happen in a lot of places. That we need to raise human well-being and improve ecosystem capacity of ecosystems to generate services in the process. And I like this idea of biomimicry. I believe in that. I think that's instead of saying like we should have innovations that reduces impact of what we're doing, I think we should go further than that. I think we should say that we should have innovations that have a positive impact on nature. And this fish farm that I showed from Spain, for example, in that it's a wetland, right? So polluted, dirty water goes into that fish farm and comes out cleaner. I mean, that's the kind of systems that we need that actually improves the ecosystems.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very interesting. A little sweet treat
Thank
for you
you
as well. It's near Christmas.
Oh yes, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.